and this is review session 4. We are now in 17.9, talking about the large intestine. Let's go ahead then and review, first of all, the functions of the large intestine that we talked about. And remember, there were three major functions. One is the absorption of water and electrolytes. So again, absorption, materials moving out of the stomach, materials being saved by the body, materials not being lost. And by time that digesting food makes its way all the way to the large intestine, pretty much all of the nutrients have been absorbed. And so again, what's left largely for the stomach to do in terms of the large intestine to do is to absorb water and to absorb electrolytes. And when we use that term electrolytes, we're typically using it in the sense of dissolved ions. And so electrolytes, think dissolved sodium, for example, and dissolved chloride and dissolved potassium. And I didn't mention this in the lecture, so I won't ask that specifically, but eventually we will come back and talk about various ion balances and water balances and so on in the body. And at that time, then, we'll again just review what we mean by electrolytes. So again, number one, then, one of the three major functions of the large intestine is to absorb water and absorb electrolytes. The second of these three major functions of the large intestine, you'll recall, is to house populations of bacteria, to house populations of various types of bacteria. And if you think about it then, so you're a bacterium, and what would make your life really, really good? Well, if you could have a nice, safe, dark place to just kind of hang out. And this doesn't all have to go into your notes, certainly. But again, you're a bacterium, and so you want a place to live, and you want good living conditions, and you want to be fed regularly without going to a lot of effort. And so picture these bacteria now, and they're living in our large intestine, and they are feeding on materials, digested food, that has made its way to the large intestine. And so it's a pretty good deal for the bacteria, but again, it's a pretty good deal for us also. One advantage that we talked about here is the fact that some of these internal bacteria, some of these large intestinal bacteria that we house, are producing various vitamins and then releasing, excreting, if you will, these vitamins into our large intestine. And we can then absorb these vitamins and make use of them. So again, a second function of the large intestine, pared down to just a few words. The large intestine houses bacteria that provide us with vitamins. This is not the only function of those bacteria, but it's certainly one. And then the third function of the large intestine is this kind of overall function that has to do with feces. And the large intestine then produces and stores and releases feces. And again, combined, we're considering these three things one of the three major functions of the large intestine. And now talking about various movements of the large intestine. And of course, when we talk about pretty much any part of the alimentary canal, we're talking about mixing movements and we're talking about propelling movements. Mixing movements in terms of the large intestine, we didn't really have much to say there. There is some mixing going on. It's probably not as important in the large intestine as it is in other alimentary canal organs, but there's some mixing of the contents of the stomach. I keep saying stomach, of the large intestine. There's some mixing going on here. And then second, in terms of propelling movements, and remember, propelling movements move digesting food along the alimentary canal. And again, talking now about the large intestine and talking about propelling movements, we made the point that there is peristalsis going on in the large intestine, but whereas in the small intestine, we had these weak, fairly continuous waves of peristalsis, so moving the food along fairly slowly through the small intestine. We made the point now that in the large intestine, these movements, these propelling movements, are less frequent than the movements in the small intestine. And they're also stronger movements. And remember then, we call these propelling movements of the large intestine mass movements. And these often occur shortly after eating. Let's stop here because, again, this gets us through chapter 17, and we'll come back with review session 5 and get into reviewing various aspects of the urinary system.